Do you want to live more sustainably but aren't sure where to start or how it fits in with your everyday living? The Renewy Living podcast simplifies sustainability so you can feel confident to take small, meaningful actions that fit into your lifestyle. Based on the lands of the Awabakal and Worimi people in Newcastle, Australia, you'll learn how to live lighter on our planet through practical ideas, stories from like-minded people, and examples of businesses doing great things. With an open heart and mind, join me, Marty Lee, as we explore how to consume less, build stronger community connections, and thrive in your neighbourhood, wherever you call home. Welcome to the Renewy Living podcast. Hello, I'm Marty Lee, and welcome to the Renewy Living podcast. When most people think of arborists, they think of chainsaws, wood chippers, and tree removals for, inverted commas, safety reasons or potential fire hazard. In this episode, I'd love you to meet Sam Hardingham, founder of Newcastle-based business Everyday Arbor. An experienced arborist, Sam is challenging that narrow view of what it means to be an arborist. His goal is to keep as many trees standing in our local environment as possible. Rather than chasing profit by saying yes to every tree removal request, Sam is putting trees first. We talk about the role trees play in our neighbourhoods, the risks versus the benefits they bring, and how their presence connects us to the bigger picture of balancing urbanisation with environmental sustainability. This episode is a reminder that trees come with issues and risks in suburbia, but should these risks outweigh the benefits of trees? G'day, Sam.
Hey, thanks for having me.
You're very welcome. We're actually doing this recording on the shores of Lake Macquarie in Greenpoint Reserve. So we're here sitting out at the beautiful lake. There's waves lapping by. There could be the occasional boat. And also, what kind of birds are we hearing in the background?
There's a lot of bell miners, the occasional whipbird. We've had a couple of cockatoos come past already in the last few minutes. And it's quite immersive sitting here and listening to those sounds of the Australian bush.
And you don't realise how unique it is until you're sitting here. And also, as a listener, hearing these sounds of the birds.
Yeah, and we're so close to suburbia as well.
It's very much your home, the place that you feel comfortable being an arborist, being around trees. What was your journey for becoming an arborist?
So when I was coming up to the end of school back in England, I wasn't too sure what I'd like to do. And I knew I liked being outside. I spent all my time out there. I went to college over there and was studying a diploma of countryside management, which is as vague as it sounds. And during my study, I realised that you could get a job climbing trees and using chainsaws and cool machinery and all the things that a late teenage boy is into. And then my career hasn't changed since. And I still really enjoy it now, 20 years later. So my initial training was in the UK, and that's where I sort of cut my teeth doing tree work. And then part of the reason to come and visit Australia was I knew there was big trees, much bigger than in England, and lots of work. And also I'm a surfer as well, so there's good waves around Newcastle.
Well, the water is warmer here for surfing. But I would imagine that the trees in the UK, the ecosystem is completely different to here. How were you able to transfer your knowledge from English trees into understanding about Australian trees?
So over here, it seems a bit more slash and burn compared to in England. Trees grow a lot slower over there. There's a bit more tree maintenance and tree pruning than you typically get here. And that's something to do with the deciduous species being more prominent there, and you can't prune eucalypts in the same way. So changing work practices a little bit to accommodate for that. It was quite a stark contrast though to see just how many trees are removed over here compared to the place I grew up, where a lot more of them are kept. But that comes with the growing conditions and trees growing much faster here.
That's interesting, because I always thought that our trees were slow growing because they seem to take generations to come into growth. But I suppose you've got the comparative of having English trees that have been there for hundreds and hundreds of years.
Yeah.
How do you see your role as an arborist?
For a long time, I worked for companies, would turn up to a job where the homeowner or the tree owner has already prescribed the works, and we would be facilitating that. It took me a little while to realise that sometimes we weren't doing best practice. I was aware of our role in reducing urban forest canopy cover in our cities, and I saw that after living in Newcastle for quite a few years, and it made me think, how can I achieve a better outcome?
By working with another company, then it sounds like that was you starting to establish your ethics and values of, as an arborist, going, well, there's this way of practicing, or there's this preferred way of practicing, which is where it's led you today in terms of you're an arborist, but you're an arborist with a difference.
Yeah, I got into tree work because I like being outside. I climbed trees as a kid, and that part of it's still really exciting, the challenge, the work processes in doing any type of tree work, and the camaraderie with your crew. I still enjoy that. To take a step back and think about what defines an arborist and what is good work practice compared to facilitating work and just doing tree work for money. Obviously, we're all part of society where we need money to exist in it, and I thought there's got to be a better way for me to uphold my values and why I got into doing this job to start with.
How do your values shine through? Is it something like when you go to a tree owner's place, and we're sort of talking about private property here, when you go to a tree owner's place and you're there to give a quote, they're expecting you to remove the tree, but you turn around and say, I actually think this tree is worth keeping. What's the response?
I get mixed responses. I've been running my own business for the last 6 years now, and I feel very fortunate. I'm in a position where I can walk away from work if I need to. The other thing that often happens is people will say, well, if you can't do the job, I'll just get someone that can. And I often say it's not because I can't do the work. I have the equipment and the skills to be able to remove these trees, but there's a reason why I won't. And I really appreciate the opportunity to be able to share that with potential clients. And at the end of the day, it's their choice, but I will hold myself accountable for my own actions there.
Yeah, that's a really strong way of leading a business. When you look at keeping a tree, what is it that is that value of keeping the tree? What are the reasons why?
I think the selling point, if you want to call it that, as a reason to keep trees is for human benefit. And most people are also aware of the habitat value and other biodiversity benefits of having trees around. A lot of the Australian species are flowering, so providing food there. And there's lots of species that live in tree hollows. Sometimes we don't have those in urban environments, but a lot of people are aware of the environmental benefits, things like carbon capture and storage, reducing urban heat island effect. The other reason people are often wanting to remove trees is based on risk, and that's something that we can provide a risk rating on. And of course, we get to some trees and we're like, whoa, how's this tree still standing? We better do something about it. But the majority of the time, there's no more risk associated with that tree than anything else we do in our daily lives.
I've had a couple of instances with trees on the house, and I always look at it by token where no humans are fortunate to have been involved in that, but there was risk and damage to the building, nothing that couldn't be claimed on insurance. But I really struggle, and okay, this is my personal thing, but I really struggle when I hear the chainsaws and people saying that they want to bring down the trees just because it might fall on the house. I see that there's so many greater benefits, or as you said, amenities to trees. When I grew up in Sydney, we grew up in a very, very bushy neighbourhood, and I think it's actually got the suburb these days, I think it's got a preservation zoning on it for trees. And so we had lots of trees in our property, and our next door neighbour had no trees, was always complaining to us about the trees and the leaves falling in their pool. However, when it came to summertime, and they didn't have a garage, when it came to summertime, their cars were the first cars to be parked under our trees in front of our house. And for us, it was that whole irony of just going, well, you don't want the trees, however, you do want the trees.
It happens very, very often, and I lost count of how many times I've arrived at a job when I've been working for another company and asked the residents, do you have air conditioning? And they say, no, why? I'm like, you're going to need it this afternoon. We're about to cut down all your shade. And more often than not, that was the first time they'd thought, oh, yeah.
Yeah, one problem can lead to the next. One of the other things that I hear crops up is about people wanting solar panels on their house, and then they want to remove the tree because it's too shady on the side of the house. It needs the solar panels. However, surely there are better cost benefits to maintaining or retaining that tree.
That's something to weigh up. So the solar is often used to justify a tree removal. I understand if you've got solar, your energy bills are going to be reduced. It does seem that more often than not, the people that have a tree in their yard that's shading their house the cost of removing the tree, and then the reduced maintenance costs of not having to clean your gutters as often, but then you've got to install the solar, and they'll be running air conditioning and things like that more often than they would have been otherwise. It's something to consider before making that decision of removing a tree and justifying it by saying, oh, but we're going to get solar and it's going to be more eco-friendly. That might not be the case. And obviously we lose the amenity value and the ecological value of that tree and the role it has in our cities. There is another option for solar as well. You can also purchase your energy through a renewable supplier, which I'm assuming some of your listeners will be aware of already. That's what I do, and I'm not deluded, as in I know the power that I get in Newcastle is still coming from our own power station, but the money that I give is going towards renewables.
So it's a secondary option that if you can't do it directly, there are alternatives to that direct solar.
Yeah.
So Sam, you mainly deal with residential properties, and you see a lot going on in residential areas. What are sort of the conversations or the things that you notice most about where trees are located?
On private properties, I'm often getting called because the resident has issues, concerns about a particular tree, and trees do come with a disservice. Leaf matter, animals in the trees, droppings on your car, that sort of thing, berries dropping on your roof in the night. These are a disservice of having trees around, and it's a case-by-case basis, but I can really feel for some of these people that do have a large tree, and it is quite a bit of upkeep. I do always try to encourage them to see the role that that tree has in the landscape and how it adds to that urban forest canopy cover. When we look across our cities, a lot of the trees are located on private property. That is making our cities greener, and it's sometimes at a bit of a cost for that tree owner.
Yes, because if you're looking at all the trees in every little individual property, if you got rid of all those trees across the whole neighbourhood, it would completely change the ecosystem of a neighbourhood when you remove all those trees.
Yeah. The thing that comes to mind quite often is a catchphrase called death by a thousand cuts. And often people will say, oh, it's just one tree. And then the next neighbour says that, and then the next person says that. So it's a difficult conversation to have sometimes, but yeah, death by a thousand cuts is something that sticks in my mind quite often.
It's like that phrase, it's only one piece of plastic. And then it's not. It's like millions and tons of plastic.
Yeah,
as well.
We all have a responsibility here to help foster more livable cities.
Are you able to share a story that is about a tree that you've saved or said that it needs to be retained in the natural environment, and then it's had like a really good community-based story or something good has come out of that?
A particular tree that comes to mind is some clients of mine up in Whitebridge. They went on a family holiday to Canberra years ago when their children were young, and they saw all the liquid ambers there, and they decided to bring one back, and they've planted it in their yard. It's 46 years old, and about 10 years ago, during a storm, there was a few branches that broke off, and they had an arborist come and prune the tree, and I've been helping them with it for the last few years. And they say that their children were climbing the trees, now their grandchildren climb it, and every Mother's Day they get the whole family over and they have photos with the tree in the autumnal foliage, and they love it. And for me, being able to maintain that tree for them is such an honour as well. Although this one was not scheduled for the chopping block anyway, it's really nice to be a part of that. And that's why I got into trees to start with, to keep them around and be able to appreciate them. And I'm like a big kid still. I get to climb trees every day. It's the best job ever.
I think you're going to love a tree close to where I live, which has been there for ages, and I think it's reached maximum height. I don't even know what kind of tree. It's a eucalyptus of some sort. It has really large leaves on it, and they've done nothing to it, but it's just got this beautiful canopy to it. And I look at that tree every time I'm on my way home to say, yes, you're still there. I am so glad that you're still there, because it's an absolutely beautiful tree. Going back to what you were talking about with the liquid amber about your maintenance, what do you do for tree maintenance? What does that mean?
So this tree in particular, the maintenance program has been to keep the crown a certain size because of the proximity to other properties, and that it had that branch failure from about a decade ago. It's good to keep that tree at a certain size for structural issues. Often with trees, there isn't anything to do. Trees typically look after themselves, and if we can imagine, trees in the bush somewhere, we don't need arborists to go and do any maintenance on those. But when we're in an urban environment with property and people around, occasionally there's some maintenance to do, whether that be pruning trees so they're not in contact with buildings. Obviously, power lines get pruned. That's a completely another story.
Yes, because that can look like butchering rather than maintaining. I don't know. Am I wrong?
That's it's maintaining clearance for the service provider. So they have their guidelines that they've got to fulfill. Often there's street trees that look terrible from one side, and when you stand around the other side of them, you wouldn't know that there's a power line going through it. It's a common thing for people to say, oh, I don't know why they don't just cut that tree down or remove it. I agree, like from one angle, it looks like a tree that's not providing much, and the other angle, it looks fine. So that's the very limited area sometimes where there's a section of council-owned property that has trees on it, and there's limited growing environment there with power lines above, pavements, roads underneath. And that's why our residential areas are so valuable for having trees, because it's often got unrestricted growing environment there.
And it seems like the less hard surfaces we have, the more friendly it is for trees. I mean, it's really hard to tell people how to build their houses, but I always feel like having a house on piers and joists would be a friendlier way to accommodate trees rather than having a house on a concrete slab with a hard surface driveway with hard pavement where there's no room for trees to grow.
Absolutely. Tree roots are opportunistic. I think we've all been along a pavement somewhere where the tree roots are starting to lift the whatever surface they've got down. And typically that's because underneath the concrete, as it heats up and cools down, it will create a layer of condensation under there. And this is a great growing environment for the tree roots. So they tend to stick closer to the surface there, and that's why we have these issues with hard surfaces and trees. Anywhere that we can have permeable paving or a permeable driveway is going to create a better growing condition for the tree and less issues in the future with that surface treatment being broken up by tree roots.
When I go to a public space and I see that there's been a tree chopped down, however, the huge trunk has been left remaining. So you have this massive dead tree that initially it just looks like an eyesore of like, why is this dead tree still left to stand? What are the benefits of doing something like that? Is that good practice?
So over the last 10 years or so, it's become a lot more common to see what we call habitat stags or a habitat tree. I'm not sure of what better term to use because all trees are habitat trees, but the dead sticks or hat racks or poles that you're referring to often left because the tree either has died or it had a structural issue that was creating a safety concern. And the idea is that stag left there is going to provide a perch for birds, a resting spot for them as they fly between different places. There's habitat value in the insects that tree may host behind the bark and in the cracks left in the wood. Typically, they're not set up very well though. And with the use of chainsaws and a special tool called a hollow hog, you can add habitat value to that stag by basically speeding up the aging process. So the things that you see on bigger, older trees like dead branch stubs and splintered wood where branches have torn off the tree, they're really good habitat value for microbats, insects. And as I mentioned earlier about the older trees having hollows, tree hollows are something that we don't have very many of in our urban environments, and that's due to tree clearing, but also not having that age diversity in our urban areas. Hollows can be viewed as a structural issue with a tree, but that's not always the case. And thinking of a tree as a whole, having that habitat value is really good for our urban areas.
Yeah. Okay. So I can see the real value in retaining that whole trunk in the ground. When you go out to residential properties, what kind of trees do you see that create or have the most structural problems for needing to be removed?
It can be so many different reasons that a tree might have issues. Sometimes it's from poor pruning practices in the past, and the trees continue to grow, but not in the best possible way. Sometimes it's from exotic species that are maybe not as adapted to the growing environment here. But there is no tree in particular that's a bad one. And it's a bit of a myth about the whole widowmaker thing. The term widowmaker actually came from in forestry when a tree had been felled and it brushes past a tree next to it and a branch breaks off and is left hanging in that tree, and then it just falls down randomly at another time and potentially when there's a forest worker there. That's where that term comes from, and the whole certain species being limb droppers type thing is a bit of a debunked myth. In Australia, the most common species of eucalypt is Eucalyptus camaldulensis. The common name is red gum, and people go, oh, red gum's a limb dropper. But it's the most widespread eucalypt across Australia, and it's not hard to work out that if a tree is going to drop a branch, just by sheer numbers, it's probably going to be a red gum. That's not to say we're going to be a bit blasé about trees, but arborists can assess risk and they can assess tree structure, have an attempt at predicting which branches might be more likely to fail, but it's a very difficult task. And I think the thing to keep in mind is that the risk of being struck by a tree is so low compared to any other risk we face in our day-to-day lives. It needs to be taken seriously, but it also needs to be put into context.
Can you talk us through the process of tree removal that you do, your process from when you're removing it, how you actually remove it, to the cycle of what happens to the tree once you've removed it?
Typically, the trees that I will be attending to are in an urban environment with buildings, infrastructure close by, and we need to remove the tree piece by piece. We're not cutting it from ground level and letting it drop. So that process involves climbing, usually setting up some sort of rigging to tie the branches on, cut them, lower them down, and they'll be processed through a wood chipper, and any of the larger wood will either be taken off to be milled or it'll be taken to a firewood processor. But ideally, we try and keep that wood on site. Lots of it can be repurposed around the garden, in the yard, made to use retaining walls and things like that, keeping people's gardens a bit more nature-based. If there's any hollow branches, they're really good left on the ground as ground habitat. The mulch is really good for improving soil conditions. So wherever possible, all the material is staying on site.
So the tree owner gets the full value or the benefit. Like, not the value, that's the wrong word, because we've just talked about value of trees. But if a tree needs to be removed, then using that value even more on the property.
Yeah, and there's time and money involved in having to remove tree waste from site. There's a double benefit of keeping as much on site as possible.
How will people know when they actually need an arborist?
So this has been a bit of a campaign of mine as I've been working through things the last few years, and I've presented at a few different conferences on this very topic. If a tree owner has already decided that that's what they want to do, and they've got a vision in their head, or they've got the pool going in or anything like that, you could just call anyone that advertises tree work. My point I'd really like to make clear is that anyone doing tree work, it's a highly skilled job. I'm not referring to poor practice or no PPE or not the right insurance or anything. When I refer to someone as being a tree lopper, I mean they will just do whatever they're asked to do. And quite often that's in a professional manner, and the skill involved is really high. But if you're just facilitating a tree owner's wish and not trying to follow some best practice in regards to trying to retain high amenity value trees, trying to retain low risk trees, it's just tree work.
An arborist or a tree lopper. So there's quite a difference, yeah? Or are we talking terminology kind of stuff here?
Part of the inspiration for me trying to define this more was a colleague of mine who I still keep in touch with now, and he was almost the catalyst for this. We worked together for years, and we'd turn up to a house, and we'd knock on the door, and someone would go, the tree loppers are here. And he'd go, we're not tree loppers, we're arborists. And it would make me think, well, what are we doing here? Because typically we're turning up and they've said, cut that tree down, and they've prescribed the works, and we haven't had any influence on that, although we are the arborists and we are supposed to know how to care for trees. That made me think about my own actions. Also, what people are thinking when they take offence at being called a tree lopper, and when it's removing healthy trees with the excuse that if I don't do it, someone else will. Is that good arboriculture? Is that why we all got into tree work? Because I'm sure that most of the people doing trees do it because they love it. I mean, the money's okay, but also some days it's just really hard work and it's messy and it is high risk. If we took the money out of it, would we still be cutting this tree down? That's the question I ask myself often.
That is a great reflective and ethical type of question, which has sort of led you to this work that you're doing. And perhaps as you've become more experienced, then you've really thought about what it is you like about doing this job.
I still enjoy the physical process of it and the challenge of doing any tree work. I feel very fortunate that I'm in a position where I don't have to use those excuses of if I don't do it, someone else will, or, I've got a business to run, I've got bills, I've got staff I need to pay, and getting caught up in that, because in my experience, it's taken me on a different path to the one that I initially set out to do. So I feel very fortunate, and I hope that anyone else out there that's either running a tree business or considering doing it can have some hope in knowing that it's possible to run a tree business like that. And the more we speak about this and the more times that I'm going to walk away from a job and say, I'm not using that excuse, I'd like other people to think about saying that as well, and imagine that if they say, no, I don't think this is the right thing to do here, I think we should try and keep this tree, and then imagine the next arborist coming and saying the same thing that they just said.
Have you got one tip that you could share with listeners to help them perhaps retain or maintain their trees on their property?
I had a classic catchphrase that I use quite often with a friend of mine. She said, trees clean up after us, so it's only fair that sometimes we have to clean up after them. They are filtering the air that we're breathing. They're slowing down the stormwater runoff as well when we have a downpour. The trees hold so much water, and that water does eventually make it to our waterways, and flooding events are going to occur. But with more trees around, we're slowing down that cycle. And then we've also got the carbon capture and storage of trees. So that's how trees are cleaning up after us a bit as well. So I agree with her. I think it's only fair that we should invest just a little bit of our time into something that is providing direct benefit to us as humans, but also the planet and the ecosystem that we live in.
Sam, what would you like listeners and other arborists to know that's really important about your work?
The thought of an arborist's responsibility, and I'd like more people to feel like they can have an influence as an arborist. The homeowners is one thing that I'd like to try and instill a bit of honour and pride in them owning this amazing environmental asset. And the other part is arborists feeling a bit more united. Let's start thinking in a bit more tree time. So that's not to get all airy-fairy about it, but trees are on a different timeline to humans. We can erase trees very quickly. And I'd like for people just to spend a little bit more time thinking about it before making these decisions. It's a common story. Often I will attend site and see trees, and they're like, yeah, this one's got to go, and this one's got to go, and this one's got to go. And I had a client just last week that said, oh, this tree's got to go. And we stood around and had a chat, and I had the time to spend with them having this conversation. And I said, I think you're really going to want this tree in the summer. It's winter right now. And we were stood out in their yard, still in the shade of the tree. I said, there's a little bit of pruning we can do. It's actually touching your building. Happy to come and do that. That's what I'd recommend right now. And I think you're really going to want this tree in the summer. So how about you just live here for 12 months? And if you still don't like it in 12 months' time, you give me a call and we'll have another conversation about it. It'd be worthwhile you just living a season with it first.
Yeah, absolutely important, because that dappledness that happens with tree shade is completely different to the shade of a man-made structure, which is quite a dense shade. And I know that for me, I love the hot weather, but when it's hot and I don't want to get burned, I do need some kind of protection. And the shade from a tree offers that to me, rather than feeling like I've got the dense, colder shade happening. So hopefully those clients have followed through and they're going to stay there for the 12 months before they reconsider.
I hope so. Yep.
Thank you so much for tuning in to this episode of the Renewy Living podcast. I hope you're feeling more confident about taking a localised and actionable approach to living sustainably. If this episode has inspired you to take simple action, please follow the Renewy Living podcast so you can catch every episode. We'd love it if you could share this episode with your friends. It's a great way to spread the word and help more people join the conversation about living sustainably. You can even send me an email with the episode that really made it for you. Hearing your positive actions for change helps me understand how these stories work within our shared communities. Head over to my website, renewyliving.com.au, for the show notes and blog posts from this episode. I look forward to sharing more stories from the people of Newcastle as we delve into our community's diverse social and environmental practices for positive planetary change from a localised perspective.